always much higher. And so I hope this thing stops, because Netanyahu's cynical, I would even say sadistic use of Israel's advanced weapons against the mostly unsheltered people of Gaza will lead to a lot of mayhem and destruction. But just like every other conflict that you and I and everyone else covered over the last few years and decades, we will go back to point zero, in the sense that there is no military solution to this kind of tension, to this kind of conflict, if you will. It's certainly not the occupation, and certainly not what is happening in Jerusalem.
Speaking of Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israel in political turmoil at the moment. I know from discussions we had in the previous hours here on Al Jazeera that you have your theories as to why this escalation is happening right now.
I think there's a good number of reasons, and I think a good part of them fall in Mr. Netanyahu's lap. You know, we've known him to be, he's widely known to be, you know, almost a serial liar and a skillful manipulator. This is just, you know, the wide perception in Israel itself and elsewhere. And so now that he is in a desperate situation, now that he is on trial in Israel on a number of important corruption charges that it's almost definite that he will end up in jail, like his predecessor, Ehud Olmert, unless he stays in power. So he has been doing everything possible in order to stay in power, including going to three different elections within 2 years. It's almost unheard of. Why? In order to stay in power. He is the only obstacle why there is no coalition government in Israel today after 2 years and 3 elections. So what has he been doing? He's been very busy. He's been very busy forming, uniting, and allying with the most radical, fanatic Israelis. And these are the Jewish Zionist Party that actually ended up with 6 seats in the present Israeli parliament. They are Mr. Netanyahu's allies. They are the ones Mr. Netanyahu has been covering for as they have escalated the tensions in East Jerusalem. They are the ones behind much of the tension that has been going on in East Jerusalem for the last several weeks and, in fact, months and years. Those very radical fanatics think that that without them taking over fully and evacuating the Palestinians from the city, there will be no peace and no Jewish state. So what we have here is now Netanyahu is encouraging these people to do this sort of escalation in East Jerusalem, leading to the response that we've seen on the part of Hamas and others saying, look, if you're going to continue strangling Jerusalem, if you're going to continue besieging Al-Aqsa Mosque, we as Hamas, we as the Palestinian leaders, we're going to retaliate. And hence, Netanyahu, in fact, jumped on the occasion, because the last thing he wants is the focus in Jerusalem. He loves the fact that the focus can now shift away from Jerusalem, from the popular, peaceful resistance in Jerusalem, to the kind of retaliation and counter relations against Gaza. That also allows him to build the kind of support within Israel for perhaps a national emergency government. He did that before, by the way. And that will also give him a chance to deny the competition within Israel, like the Atid party and the Yair Lapid's of the Israeli political system, to form an alternative coalition government. So I think, to a large degree, Prime Minister Netanyahu is using this unfolding tragedy in order to remain in power. Whether he succeeds or not, of course, is another story. But for the time being, this is the story. The story is that why now? Why the escalation? Why the tragedy? Well, because there is this one man that wants to maintain power in the country, and that is Benjamin Netanyahu.
Marwan, for the moment, many thanks. Stay with us. We'll be back with you a little later. Our senior political analyst, Marwan Bashara, there, live in Doha. It's just after 1/2 past the hour. This is Al Jazeera.
More or wider range of violence, of escalation. We are expecting more buildings that could be bring down, like Hanadi one, and as we learned that even the one behind us also will be destroyed. As still there is no confirmation, but this is the news what we have received now. We are still, the night is still in the beginning, and we are expecting that later on there will be more rockets by the Palestinian fighting groups and Israelis, which have extended their bank of targets. We are expecting them to hit more residential areas, and they even some voices say that they will move to the next step, which is targeting senior commanders of the fighting groups, and could be also some of the political figures of the Palestinian political groups.
And Safwat, we were talking to Harry Forces earlier about what happens to Israelis when the sirens go off and there's incoming fire from Gaza. What about the people of Gaza? Do they have anywhere to go, any shelters, anywhere to take shelter when Israel is attacking targets in the Strip?
Yes, I heard my colleague Harry when he said that they were going into shelters, but when the rockets were fired from Gaza. In Gaza, there are no shelters. The only thing that people can do is just stay in their homes. That's why when the Israelis hit any target, most of the casualties are civilian, because there is nowhere to go, no bunkers, no shelters, no places prepared for such explosions or such escalation. So the only thing people can do is just to stay home and wait for the next target, where and how and who.
Safwat, for the moment, many thanks. Safwat Al-Khatut there, live for us in Gaza City. No doubt we'll be back with you in the next few minutes, Safwat. I want to bring in Al Jazeera's senior political analyst, Marwan Bashara, who's been standing by since this all began, and has been listening and watching watching our coverage here. Marwan, we knew this was coming, wasn't it? Some kind of retaliation here after Israel struck that residential building in Gaza.
Yes, absolutely. And I was taken a bit by what I heard from our correspondents, and I think, you know, the fact that we have, and we are unique in that as Al Jazeera, having two correspondents on both sides of the so-called border, both in Gaza and Israel. That's important. But I think the important observation we just heard is that these are two very different situations. Israel is a modern, prosperous, strong nuclear power state with the most advanced air force in the region and perhaps in the world, one of the most. And Gaza is a big concentration camp of refugees that's been as such for the past 50 plus years, an impoverished camp of refugees. And whatever they have in so-called missile technology is basically homemade or garage-made type of archaic, arms. And the more important observation is the one about shelters. You know, people in Gaza, 2+ million of people that have no shelters. No such thing exists. So basically, the asymmetrical nature of this conflict, if you want to call it that way, between Israel and Gaza tonight is the most important aspect of it, in the sense that there is no two sides per se. That two-sidism is a fake news, if you will, when describing what's going on in Israel and Gaza. Just look at the figures, not just this conflict. Look at what happened in 2014, 2008, 2006, and before that. There's always this disproportionately high casualties and death and destruction in Gaza in comparison to the very low injury or perhaps death in Israel. Of course, in as far as we and hopefully everyone else is concerned, any death is a very sad and tragic development. But clearly, the price that Gaza paid, that Palestinians in Gaza pay.
Demonstrators inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Plans to evict Palestinian residents from East Jerusalem to make room for Jewish settlers have fueled protests that escalated over the weekend. And today, tensions are particularly high as Israel is marking Jerusalem Day, the anniversary of when Israeli troops captured East Jerusalem in 1967.
Of course, from an Israeli point of view, Palestinians want to see East Jerusalem as their future capital, and they see this as a provocation. It's a very difficult day. Usually the route goes through East Jerusalem through Palestinian neighborhoods, through one of the main gates, Damascus Gate, and then through the Muslim Quarter. Now we understand that Israeli security officials even have warned that under the current circumstances that the route at least, or the route should be changed, but we haven't heard anything to that regard. What has been decided is to close the Temple Mount or the Haram al-Sharif.
להתקדם, לא בהליכה.
Through the day. First of all, this is the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. For over an hour, police were firing stun grenades and rubber bullets and tear gas towards Palestinians. They in turn threw stones and other objects. This footage was released by Israeli police. These are Israeli security officers. During one confrontation, they say thousands of Palestinians had barricaded themselves inside the mosque overnight. and were ready with stones and Molotov cocktails in anticipation of a confrontation. Then this video shows police firing tear gas, and we see one wounded man being carried away. We're told 20 police officers were injured, so that is what was happening outside the mosque. And then this was inside. You can hear the chanting inside, but also the confrontation taking place outside. Some videos on social media show stun grenade canisters landing inside the mosque. Then this is the aftermath. As you can see, lots of debris, shoes and broken pieces of glass scattered across the mosque. We also have seen pictures of a burnt carpet and a burnt Quran. The Palestinian Red Crescent says 228 Palestinians have been taken to hospital for treatment and that 7 are in
the white contrails of Israel's missile defense system cutting across the sky, then moving to intercept Palestinian rockets fired from the Gaza Strip on Monday. Islamist militants fired a barrage of rockets toward Jerusalem and southern Israel in what the Palestinian Hamas group said was punishment for violent confrontations between Israeli police and Palestinian protesters. The rockets triggered air raid warnings, sending Israeli school children into bomb shelters. There were no immediate reports of casualties from the rocket fire in Israel. Retaliation from Israel was swift. In Gaza, the health ministry said at least 20 people, including 9 children, were killed in Israeli airstrikes on the Palestinian territory. Some of the injured were brought to this hospital in northern Gaza, where a child cried out in pain, and a woman who lost her husband screamed as she followed his body out of the hospital. Israel's military said it carried out strikes against armed groups, rocket launchers, and military posts in Gaza, after militants there crossed what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called a red line by firing on the Jerusalem area for the first time since the 2014 war.
The terrorist organizations crossed a red line on Jerusalem Day and attacked us on the outskirts of Jerusalem. Israel will respond very forcefully.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Monday urged all sides to take steps to reduce tensions.
Needless to say, we're very focused on the situation in Israel, West Bank, Gaza. Very deeply concerned about the rocket attacks that we're seeing now that need to stop and need to stop immediately.
Tensions have been rising for weeks in Jerusalem. Jewish groups are trying to evict Palestinian residents from a neighborhood in the eastern part of the city. As Israel celebrated Jerusalem Day earlier on Monday with marches marking its capture of eastern sections of the Holy City in the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, violence erupted at Al-Aqsa Mosque, Islam's third most sacred site. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society said more than 300 Palestinians were injured in clashes with police who fired rubber bullets, stun grenades, and tear gas.
And there you go. I was talking about how unsafe that remaining portion of the building is. It has now collapsed. We're not sure whether that was another missile attack that brought the building down completely, but it has now gone. It was a missile, I'm being told. At least 2 missiles hit the building, the remaining part of the building that was left standing after that first missile strike some 25 minutes or so ago. All right, I was telling you about missiles being fired from Gaza into Israel. They've reached as far as Ashkelon, Ashdod, Tel Aviv, and other areas in southern and central Israel. 5 civilians and a soldier have been killed there. Let's bring in Al Jazeera's Harry Fawcett, who's live for us in southern Israel. Harry, we're just looking at another missile strike. At least 2 missiles hit the remaining part of that building that we saw coming down here earlier. This is the moment when the building was finally brought down. Harry, that was a building that housed media offices and ground floor level shops.
Yes, I mean, as far as the Israelis are concerned, what they're saying in bringing down these towers is that they are also being used in part, whether it be some apartments within them or something else. They're being used in part by fighting factions within Gaza, and that makes them legitimate targets, especially given the fact that they have been ringing up building managers to clear those buildings of civilians before they take them down. It is also a huge statement of power and a very visual statement of destruction in Gaza and visible to the residents of Gaza and also Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and others. What it also does, of course, is renders hundreds and hundreds of people homeless in the middle of a military escalation. So there is a huge consequence to civilian life that is going to be felt by these big destructive acts. At the same time, Israel is saying that it did kill earlier on Wednesday 6 senior command members of the Hamas General Staff. It says that they were, among them, the head of the Gaza City Brigade and 5 others who were involved in things such as intelligence and rocket production. 10 others who worked in those areas also killed in those attacks. And that is something that has been confirmed by Hamas, is almost certain to elicit a major response from Hamas in terms of more rocket fire. That's what the expectation is in any event. Nonetheless, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said it was making good on what he'd warned of the day before, and he said that there will be more to come.
I said yesterday that these sons of darkness, the terrorists of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, they bear responsibility. A short while ago, we eliminated senior commanders in the Hamas General Command, including the commander of Gaza Brigade and other commanders. This is just the beginning. We will strike them with hits they did not dream of.
Harry, while all of this going on, there's a parallel crisis unfolding in Israel's mixed Palestinian-Israeli towns and neighborhoods.
Yes, that's right. This is an issue which is also very much occupying the Israeli government. It's a crisis of a related but different kind, one within the country itself and the communities themselves, the Jewish and Arab communities who live here. 20% of the Israeli population is Palestinian Israeli. And what we've seen is after a shooting dead of a Palestinian Israeli man in Lod on Monday night, a massive funeral which led to clashes with the Israeli security forces, and then an eruption really of violence in many mixed Jewish Arab towns, particularly focused on Lod, where we saw Jews attacked with stones, a synagogue set on fire, also Arabs being attacked as well in various places. And so this is a real crisis for the government. They have instituted a civil emergency in Lod. They've put a curfew in place due to come into force at 8 p.m. tonight, so less than an hour away. And 3 other cities as well. The border force, usually used in the occupied West Bank, they have been deployed to try to restore order. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledging to use an iron fist to do so.
And Harry, let's talk about the situation in Israel itself with that barrage of rockets, over 1,000 rockets now having been fired from Gaza into southern Israel. A number of people have been killed there. What's the mood in the country itself? And is there anyone at the moment who is mediating between the two sides to perhaps bring an end to this?
Well, to start with that point, there were efforts, we understand, from the Egyptians who have acted as mediators in the past during these, well, it's difficult to say these sorts of escalations because this is an extremely unusual, rare and enormous one. But yes, there were efforts by the Egyptians to try to mediate, but there seemed to be very little will to step back from the brink, and those efforts, in the short term at least, have failed. As for the impact of what's been coming out from Gaza, as you say, more than 1,000 rockets, an enormous amount of weaponry coming out of Gaza, targeting Israeli cities. Most notably, there was that double barrage in the middle of the night and earlier in the evening on Tel Aviv. We've seen 5 Israeli civilians killed in those rocket strikes. The most recent were overnight in Lod as well. A father and his young daughter, both of them Palestinian Israeli citizens. And then there was another attack early this morning when an Israeli military jeep came under fire from an anti-tank missile, and 1 soldier confirmed killed, 2 others were injured, one of them critically. And so, as I've been saying, that there is just a feeling that more and more of this is what we can expect in the coming days. Certainly a big response from Hamas is likely in the coming hours, and each step along this road, the further both sides go, the harder it is to get back. This is becoming an extremely, it's already a deadly situation and a dangerous one. It's almost looking irreversible that there will be a still bigger conflict on the way.
Al Jazeera's Harry Fawcett reporting live from southern Israel. Harry, many thanks indeed. Calls grew on Wednesday for a de-escalation from nations around the world. China expressed deep concern and urged all parties to exercise restraint to avoid further casualties. Russia is calling on Israel to stop all settlement activity in Palestinian territories. Russia's President Vladimir Putin and Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan spoke on Wednesday, with Erdogan demanding that Israel be given a strong and deterrent lesson for its treatment of Palestinians. The EU says that the priority should be de-escalation and the prevention of civilian deaths. Germany says that Israel has a right to self-defense against rockets being fired out of Gaza, and the UN Security Council has been meeting for an emergency session on the escalation. Let's go live now to the White House. Our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, is there for us. The U.S. Secretary of State has spoken to his Israeli counterpart, we're hearing, and the U.S. Secretary of Defense has spoken to his counterpart. The Secretary of State, for his part, asking for both sides to cease violence. Kimberly, what more has he said?
Yeah, this coming down just moments ago. The Biden administration, if we've known for days, has been working behind the scenes in private as well as public statements to nudge Israel to de-escalate the tensions that have been playing out across television screens.